Hello, everyone. Welcome back to Undivided Dialogues. My name is Chris Hargraves, the Big West Conference. Undivided Dialogues, of course, the speaker series that is created by the Undivided Committee of the Big West Conference as a way to educate and continue the conversation about various topics. And today, I'm pleased to be joined by three panelists who will be talking about grassroots organizations. And one in particular is CADSA, which we have members of here today, and we will not only define that acronym later, but first, let's meet our three panelists today. First, Mikaela Adolphus, who is the co-founder of CADSA and a former student athlete at UC Davis. Mikaela, I messed it up already. Mikaela.
Okay, gotta give you the chance to get it.
I know, I said that as soon as we got on, I was gonna mess it up, and what happened? I messed it up, so. I'm probably going to mess it up a lot as we go along. So, but thank you for joining us today.
Thank you for having me.
Move on to Sochi Bryson, who is also a former student athlete at UC Davis and also a member of CADSA. She's a project manager. Hi, Sochi. How are you today?
Hi, Chris. I'm doing pretty well. I'm really excited to have this conversation. Me and Mikaela have been working really hard with CADSA for a while, and really excited to have Dr. G on board with us too. So thanks for having us.
Of course. And preempted, of course, Dr. Gyasmine George-Williams. We'll call her Dr. G today. Thank you so much for joining us. She's an activist, a sociocultural practitioner, and an assistant professor at the University of Laverne. So Dr. G, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you, Chris. Hey, Big West. Hey, ladies, I'm happy to be here. And I'm looking forward to this conversation.
Well, we're here to talk about grassroots organizations. So Dr. G, as you can see right here, we have our first slide up of grassroots, a definition of grassroots. So why don't you walk us through this? It's the first part of our conversation.
Sure. I think it's really important for us to lay foundation. I think that, sometimes when we hear grassroots organizing or activism or advocacy, there may be, multiple different definitions or, maybe misconceptions about what exactly it is. So we thought we'd give you a definition so that we can lay the foundation and get the convo started. So grassroots, this definition, it's the illustration itself, right? Building from the ground up. It means the most basic or even fundamental level of any sort of activity in an operation, an organization, a community, et cetera. It's the roots of the grass, right? It's the foundation, salt of the earth. And so when an organization or a community, they want to make a change, they start from the ground up, hence grassroots. In simpler terms, it's the place where things begin and grow, right? In the modern context, the word is often used to drive sometimes an ideology or a political movement, but we're going to speak a lot more that it's that and so much more. And essentially, in a nutshell, y'all, necessity is the mother of invention, right? The foundation of grassroots organizing, grassroots activism, and advocacy. So that's the kind of basic definition of what grassroots organizing is. So as we, as you're thinking, you registered for the webinar, so you're interested either where you can see yourself in this particular movement of building something from the ground up. Can I make a difference? And, to make a long story short, absolutely. And so in my scholarship and things that I've had the pleasure of working on, I've built from grassroots activism myself. And so these are some questions that I invite y'all to reflect on, to see really, is grassroots organizing, is grassroots activism and advocacy for me? So as you reflect, think about your ecosystem, right? Think about your even social community, even social media, right? Can you identify opportunities where you desire to build a campaign, a program, right, organization, or some sort of a community, right? It doesn't necessarily have to be in the community. You have a voice for those students that are here, right? Especially now, the time is now. So think about your circle, right? Think about where you think you can make a change and who can you bring with you along that. So that's the first thing that we invite you to reflect on. The second is, okay, voila. Let's say you received funding. We're not even gonna talk about the amount. You've just received some sort of funding, right? What would you do with that funding? If you could think about something that you can build from the ground up, something to make a change, what would you do? Think big. what would you do with that funding? Would you create something from the grassroots level? If so, what comes to mind, right? What comes to mind? No idea is too small, no idea is too big, right? So start those wheels rolling as you're thinking about grassroots activism. And then lastly, who do you admire as an activist or an advocate or organizer? And do they engage in grassroots activism? And so if that's the case, think about maybe some of the things they've built from the ground up, some of the programs and things that they've been a part of. And that can really start the wheels to roll to see if grassroots advocacy and organizing is something that you can be a part of. Some examples of grassroots organizing. Let's harken back to our activist ancestors when we think about the civil rights movement, the Black Panther Party for Self-Defense. That was a wonderful program, wonderful organization. I am a product. My father was a former Black Panther, and so learning about the ins and outs of what they did on a larger scale was grassroots at its finest. If we talk about fast forward to the 90s, to those that are in the Bay Area, right? The Chicano Latino studies, those majors and things that happened even back in the day in San Francisco State, the building of either ethnic studies or Black studies, right? And then of course, when we fast forward to present day, Black Lives Matter, right? The ladies will speak more about really the epitome of grassroots activism while we're here is CASDA. And where that idea came from for me with my dissertation, the Black Student-Athlete Summit was a grassroots, right? It was something that we all share something in common that sparked so much passion in us. And so as you think and as you reflect on some of the examples of grassroots, do you feel a spark, right? Think about on your campus. What types of programs, groups, clubs, organizations do you feel that aren't there, but that you can make a difference and that you can build? So I want to throw to my wonderful teammates. I'm so appreciative and blessed to serve on the board of CASDA, but I'm going to go ahead and toss it on to my wonderful ladies of CASDA. And please share a little bit about CASDA itself and really what led you to even creating and being a part of something great. Mikaela, Xochitl, what say you? Passing the baton to you.
Mikaela.
Yes, I can start. So first, just to give some definition around CADSA, CADSA stands for the Coalition for African Diaspora Student-Athletes, or Black student-athletes. And so what CADSA represents and what we do is we work to unite and support Black student-athletes within collegiate athletics. And we want to make them feel seen, heard, supported, and then also provide them with resources and the support they need to be successful and have a better collegiate athletic experience. So that's kind of who we are, what we do, and you'll see it on the screen. And another part goes into the second half of what we do. But how CADSA started, as Dr. G mentioned, the Black Student-Athlete Summit was a big part of it. But really, it was out of the struggle that a lot of Black student-athletes were facing on Davis's campus. So one, we felt displaced. We weren't united. We didn't have any connection with each other unless you were on the same team. So, and if you did have a connection with someone on another team, it's because you lived with them or you had something that connected you, but it wasn't like a fluid process. We didn't just all know each other. So that was one. And then the second thing was, as a Black student athlete, you can feel very isolated on your teams, especially at a PWI or a predominantly white institution. And these teams are also predominantly white. So when you're dealing with things, the way you cope is going to be affected by the environment that you have in the community. And the Black student athletes on our campus did not have community. And then the last thing that we were facing was being displaced from the Black community in general. So as a student athlete, you're funneled into a lot of athletic things. So you are in the space with your teammates, then you go to study hall with your teammates, you go to the training room with your teammates, you probably eat with your teammates, like everything is with the team. And then you have nothing else other than class. But even then, you really don't get to branch out, because as soon as you're done with class, you're going to something related to sports. So you don't really get that chance to branch out and understand the other organizations and groups that exist within your community, especially within the Black community. So knowing all of this, a few of us came together and we're sharing this experience and we want it to change. we pushed on Davis to support that change. And they ultimately pushed on us and said, we'll support you, but you have to be able to make this space for yourself because we don't know exactly what you need. You know what you need. And so after going to the Black Student-Athletes Summit, understanding this is an issue that student-athletes or Black student-athletes face on almost every campus, and the way they mitigated it is by creating a Black student-athlete organization or a group to support each other. We were like, okay, we got to do this. So that was how the inception of it on Davis's campus happened. Sochi, I don't know if you want to add anything else to that.
I mean, you did really cover a lot of it. But like Mick said, you know, being a student athlete can be extremely isolating. And then being a Black student athlete is even more so isolating. And I remember, you know, my freshman, sophomore years of college, I was like, dang, like, am I the only person experiencing this? Am I, you know, by myself experiencing this? And, you know, after the Black Student Athlete Summit, it was very apparent that no, this is a problem everywhere. This is, you know, unfortunately, extremely common issue for Black students and Black student athletes. And like Mick said, there were just these gaps in community. And, you know, I didn't go to a BSU event until the end of my second year of college because I just didn't know how to, you know, go about it. I didn't really have any other Black friends outside of the track team. You know, like I didn't really know anybody outside of athletics. And so CADSA, we really just formed this organization and really a community, you know, really a family of other student athletes who were looking for that connection and looking to fill those gaps in their experiences and just, you know, overall enhance their time at Davis.
I will say they're selling themselves short. First of all, they're being too modest. Okay, and let me say that. So, as a faculty member, as someone that is able to support, right, my student athletes in ways in the classroom and hopefully outside of the classroom, I'm seeing firsthand the wonderful growth you know, that this wonderful organization is doing. I teach, one of the classes that I teach at my campus at the University of Laverne is the Black Experience in the United States class. And, you know, of course, I carved out, you know, some weeks to really unpack activism as well as athlete activism. And my wonderful Mikaela spent some time. She came, although we were in this virtual space, but she came and she shared and she inspired. I had quite a few athletes in my classroom. And because she came and shared her journey as well as what Kaz is doing, we're building a chapter at my university, right? And so I'm happy to serve either as the advisor or some sort of, you know, support system. So for those faculty or administration or staff that's in this, you know, in this webinar, there is a place and space for us to support, right, this movement and support, just so that our athletes, wherever they are on campus, can feel safe, right, and can feel supported, and most importantly, understood. So they help. What I would love to see is a CASDA chapter on every single campus, right? A safe space for our Black college athletes who may also identify as activists, just for them to have a space to be. So they're being modest, but what they're doing is great. They started off at Davis and now they're national. And so I'm excited to see, and as a board member, to just see the great work that they're doing. So I thought I'd say that because they're, but what they do is great. What they're doing is great.
Thank you.
Well, that's actually a great segue to the vision part of it here. And Mikaela, maybe you can start with this part of it. So what is the long-term vision of CADSA? Is it not just, as Dr. G mentioned, a chapter on every campus, but what does it do to help the Black community and those Black students on each campus?
I think one part of it is obviously to have a Black student-athlete organization on every campus within the NCAA. But beyond that, when you think about supporting disadvantaged communities or minorities, it increases or improves the experience for everyone around them. One, it diversifies what you know about these different communities and different people. It diversifies who we have in these spaces, which ultimately is always going to improve what the space is doing in the environment of the space. So that's a long-term goal for us, to be able to improve the overall experience for student athletes, not just Black student athletes, but for the entire collegiate athletic space. But also another part of it is to just make it known that student athletes are more than just athletes. And I think what was big for CADSA when it came to going from just Davis to now a national organization was that second year we went to the Black Student Athlete Summit, we were talking to other leaders of Black student-athlete organizations, and we were understanding that they did not have the same connection to the Black community, the greater Black community on their campuses as CADSA was making at Davis. And so there was when we were like, okay, this is a disparity or a disconnect that we would like to see mended across all campuses, because it's one thing to bring student athletes together, but once you're not a student athlete anymore, you deal with this dysphoria and you just don't understand, like, who am I now? You have to rediscover yourself. And it's a lot harder to do that when you've never been exposed to anything outside of athletics and you don't have a community outside of athletics. And so that was something that we pinpointed from the beginning, but it grew in that second year of CADSA running, understanding that, you know, this is an issue and not everybody is seeing this issue, or they don't all have the answers or the tools to deal with the issue. So that was really the big push to make it national. And that's also a big push for us, is to unite the communities, to understand that a divided community, it doesn't work, and we are stronger united. That's one of our slogans. So I think those are, to myself, those are the big goals for the future. Xochitl, if you want to share anything else.
Yeah, so for me personally, I will say it, I'm a huge nerd and I really, really value, you know, academia and just,
Nothing wrong with nerd life. Nothing wrong.
Perfect.
That's why I'm okay to say, I'm proud to say it. But I definitely saw this disconnect between student athletes and, you know, higher education and pursuing like more professional goals and careers and things like that. And like Mick said, like once you stop being an athlete, there's that, oh shoot, what do I do now? And so, at least for me personally, a very large part of CADSA is connecting Black student athletes to those resources, connecting them to mentors or, you know, internships and things like that, because we definitely have had people on our boards and people who are in the club say, I haven't had an internship. I'm about to go into my senior year. I don't know how to apply to grad school. I don't know how to ask someone to be my mentor. I don't even know where to find a mentor. So, you know, we're bridging those gaps within the Black community, but also within the student athlete community for, you know, professional and career development. I think that's a really large part of what CADSA does, is like resource acquisition and really streamlining those resources to student athletes, since, you know, it's definitely difficult to find them just as a student. And, you know, like we said, with being a student athlete gets even more difficult. Add the extra layer of being a Black student athlete, you know, becomes almost impossible. And just, we are trying to make that experience easier, more enjoyable. So, you know, student athletes aren't always worrying about where am I going to find this, or, you know, how am I going to achieve this? And so we really just, we're here to like uplift our Black student athletes. And, you know, along the way, it's not, like Mick said, it's not just for Black student athletes. Helping Black student athletes helps student athletes. It helps the athletics community. So, you know, we're just really trying to better that experience. We're really trying to push those resources and build that community. So overall, like as a collective, it's just, you know, a greater experience.
Dr. G, and it's something that actually Sochi mentioned in this, was kind of the disconnect of student athletes with administrators. So what can administrators do to kind of bridge that connection? And then also with organizations like this, how can they help?
Right. Well, you know, like I said, I'm appreciative that our worlds collided, that I could even learn, you know, about CADSA, and then, you know, being able to sit on the board and see the growth, right, and see where I can continue to support. And, you know, as a former athlete, as a former coach, I understand just what life after sports, what does that look like? And, you know, I have friends that there wasn't anything like CADSA, nothing close, or even their athletic department didn't necessarily have, you know, a player development, you know, either director or things like that, where there can be that wraparound support for while the student, it continues to play, right? But then most importantly, even in the off season and when they're done, right? If their eligibility is done, but they still want to continue on in grad school or things like that. So I've seen it, I've lived it. And had the opportunity to even research it, right? So this is a beautiful opportunity that we're talking about it. But I'm a nerd too, Sochi, how just, you know, academia and the importance of that. So I'm a professor now, but I've served in student affairs since 2002. And I've done, you know, student leader training, and there's never been any sort of either caveat or space where there's leadership development for athletes. So I've done all, you know, trainings and written, you know, about student leaders, right? And all the characteristics that make a great student leader, our athletes have that, because our student athletes are more than just whatever ball, right? Or whatever their sport of choice is. And so in my research, my dissertation spoke, it literally, you know, co-signs all that these wonderful women are saying, is that, you know, sometimes the either athletic director or you know, recruiter, whomever, they come to the houses, they sit on the couches of these wonderful young men and women and individuals saying they're going to care for them. But in many ways, it's their athletic identity that they're truly put first. I get it. You're going to a particular college to play sports, but these beautiful young men and women and individuals are more than that. And so my research, like I said, my dissertation, I created something called the BALL model, which is the Black Athlete Activist Leadership Model. And that, you know, I had the pleasure of walking alongside with 9 wonderful Black college athletes who also identified as activists. And when I spent time with them, I asked them, Chris, okay, hey guys, what can we do as either faculty, staff, administrator, people of the community? What can we do to support you, to understand, right, to engage, and most importantly, empower? And so the Black Athlete Activist Leadership Model shares about, you know, literally from the mouths of babes, what they said. And I think one of the biggest tenets in that model is to recognize that they are more than whatever sport they play. I think the second one that's extremely important is, what is the campus climate? Let's take inventory of the campus climate. You know, how welcoming is the campus climate to any other identities other than, you know, whatever sport that they play? And so once we can understand the campus climate, learning about the intersecting identities that these wonderful students who happen to be athletes, right? Because they're human beings and they bring all these beautiful identities. So really engaging in the intersectionality of it and learning about who they are outside the field, right, in the court. And so lastly, you know, you're checking the campus climate, but what type of interdepartmental connections need to take place in order for wherever a student athlete is on their campus, they feel seen, they feel supported, and they feel whole. And so I conduct, you know, trainings. I'm a counselor by trait. So I have assisted in the building of either positions in the counseling department specifically for athletes at different universities, and I've helped with different strengths-based mentoring. So there's things that we can do as faculty and staff, but when we take account that they're leaders, right? They have these characteristics for leadership wherever. They have these wonderful identities that they bring on the campus that make them who they are. We have to check the campus climate, right? What type of salient, obvious, or non-salient kind of covert messages does the university, you know, send out? Where is the diversity in faculty and staff? Let's look at curriculum. Let's look at what types of programming that the athletics department puts on or hosts. And then how can we collaborate with academic affairs and student affairs so that once, you know, God forbid, if an athlete does get injured or they have to step away from their sport, how can they stay connected to different groups and programs that they may identify with? So those are some of the things that I have the pleasure of researching and literally as a practitioner doing, but it's really looking at these wonderful young men and women and individuals for more than just their sport.
And I think, go ahead, Mikaela.
I just wanted to add to this because at that end part, Dr. G, you said if they get injured or want to step away from sport. I want to say it's also important while they're still athletes, like active athletes. I think we limit what athletes are seen to be able to do and handle. And I think having the option to explore who you are outside of athletics should be there even as you are excelling in your sport and school and everything else you're doing. Like I always want to push empowering our student athletes to be more than an athlete while they are an athlete, because they can. And I'm only saying they can because I did, and I see lots of student athletes who do inside and outside of CADSA. So I just wanted to put that out there, that the support and the connection shouldn't just come if something happens or once they are done with sports and athletics. It should be part of the whole athletic experience. It should be a full enrichment, not just compartmentalized and segmented out.
And both of you are wonderful examples of that. And you know, and the students in my dissertation research, they literally say that, where many of them engaged in grassroots activism by creating different safe spaces and groups. Mainly, a lot of them went to the Black Student-Athlete Summit. And just like the two of you said, they saw themselves in the faces of the other student athletes. They saw themselves, they said, oh my goodness, there's administrators, there's staff, there's faculty who are actually conscious, right? And actually down with the cause of learning about the lives of the athletes that has nothing to do, right, with the sport. And as the climate that we're in now, you know, it's sometimes athletic departments and universities don't necessarily know, how do I even engage in conversations to understand what maybe some of our athletes are going through, right? Especially this past year and a half, it's been so interesting. There's been multiple pandemics that have been taking place, as we all know, right? COVID-19, but also racism and oppression. And so the athletes that identify, right, with particular identities that are front and center with being oppressed, how can coaches, how can faculty, how can staff, and so forth connect with these folks, right? Just as Mikaela was saying, we go to, you know, study hall with our teammates. We go here, we go there and whatnot. And so if that's how the, you know, things are set up with particular teams, our coaches, our faculty, our staff, those that our athletes fall under their care, we have to make sure that we are continuing to build the tools to authentically say, we are here for you. We want to understand what you're going through. Exactly what Mikaela said, not just after, not just when something happens in the climate or the community, but a continuous building of relationships throughout their time at the university, whether they have their jersey on or not. So absolutely, it's got to be from the start. That built-in support is something that, you know, is the epitome of why CASA is going to continue to be great, but it can't just be, you know, the group, the organization. It's got to be, you know, all those on campus that say that athletes are under their care and they care for them. Got to care for the whole young man, woman, or individual.
Yeah, and I think that brings an interesting point of allyship. And I think that there's so many questions. As you can see, clearly there's 4 Black people that are taking part in this now. So how does allyship work outside of those that are tasked to do it? And I want to start that with Dr. G, and then I'll go to Sochi with that one.
Well, you know, the interesting word is ally, right? Or allyship. So something that I've learned in writing research in my book and things like that is there's allies and then there's accomplices. So I had the pleasure of, I think it's 2017, time is flying, sitting in this great town hall with 2 of the 3 founders of Black Lives Matter. And that is the first time where I heard a breaking down or unpacking of allyship versus being an accomplice. And so in a nutshell, I think the word ally and allyship, we know more of it, right? It's more mainstream. And so I put it this way, my brain is always thinking about athletics. Allyship, a perfect example of that is, you know, there was a wave of athletes, both at the professional level as well as collegiate, that were kneeling during the national anthem, right? Or sitting or things like that. An ally is their teammate or coach or whomever that has their hand on their shoulder or on their back, right? We've seen that visual, a beautiful optic, a beautiful visual. That's an ally. They're showing, okay, I'm in support of you, right? I'm here for you. An accomplice, that would be another athlete, a teammate or coach kneeling with them. There's something different when you are with the particular group that either in demonstrating or in pain or part of the oppressed that are literally at the same level as the particular group. When that coach, when that teammate, right, or assistant coach, when they are kneeling with them, they are risking their position. They are risking their positionality, right? We know about privilege. We all have privilege in different ways, shape, and forms. And so an accomplice is someone that understands that they have privilege in some way or shape, but they are willing to risk it. They are willing to risk their position, their privilege, and things like that. And so there's a place and space for all of us. And like I said, we all have privilege and we all have some sort of ecosystem. But I think the time that we are living in now is we need everyone has a place and space, right, in this movement for not just grassroots activism and advocacy, but to really speak truth to when things are not equitable. And so that's, easier said than done. But I think for those that may not either identify as an athlete or even as an activist or advocate, we still need you. And so I think the ultimate act is speaking up when there, are moments of injustices, and risking your privilege to say, hey, I'm here with you. And I stand with you or kneel with you or whatever the case is. And I think that's where we can draw the line in the sand, where that level of consciousness is heightened, to where you have to step out and speak out, and most importantly, show out that you're in solidarity with us, or whomever it is. So those are kind of two things that I also unpack in my research in my book, the difference, and I give examples throughout history of who were allies and
I definitely I've never heard of, that distinction between being an ally and an accomplice. I think in, my college activism realm, I have just kind of lumped the two together. But I definitely, it's about being present. It's about, I think, taking ownership for things that you see in front of you and you say, that makes me uncomfortable, that's making them uncomfortable, I definitely should say something. Am I going to say something? So I definitely, it's about being present in that moment, in those spaces, that if you have privilege, you definitely need to, acknowledge that. You need to own up to it. And you also need to say something if there's something, like you said, inequitable going on. I'm forgetting the entire question overall.
Me too, I understand.
All good.
What is allyship? Was that the question? Yeah. Okay. But yeah, I mean, I definitely love when people are supportive, when people, they're that hand on the shoulder. And I know that advocacy looks different to everyone. And I know there are limits to what people can and can't do. But I think especially in the realm of social media and extreme performative activism and, allyship and things like that, I think in those spaces that you are put in, when there are those uncomfortable, ooh, was that joke okay? Or was that a micro or macro aggression? When you come to those crossroads, you need to make that decision. You need to be present in that moment and not be a bystander, because that is just as bad. You can call yourself an ally as much as you want, but if you are a bystander in moments of, injustice, in moments of inequity, you're not helping the cause. You're not being that person that's pushing forward change. And so, being an ally, posting things on Instagram, yes, I understand there are limits to what people can and can't do, but I think once you reach those crossroads, you definitely have to make a conscious and active decision to act.
Good.
And I can jump in on this.
Yeah, go ahead.
So my part of what's an activist and an accomplice, regardless of where you are, I think a lot of it is around education. And I always think that we won't find change, or we won't find peace, or we won't get rid of these problems without educating people. But more than that, you need to educate yourself. So if you truly feel that you're an ally, first step I think is ally, then accomplice. But if you're trying to take that step into allyship, education and educating yourself is huge. Yes, you can come and ask someone. That people come and ask me questions all day, and I will never shy away from answering them or tell them no, don't come to me. But at some point, I'm gonna throw some resources at you and say, hey, it's in here. Let me know what you think or what you found out. And beyond that, take that step to do it yourself, because you don't really support a movement until you're willing to learn about that struggle, understand what that struggle was and is today, and then how you can change that and affect the future in a positive way when it comes to that struggle. And so I think a lot of allyship is everything that Dr. G and Sochi said, but I think the other piece is education and taking it upon yourself to educate yourself on what's going on in the world and how can you improve it.
Oh, that was beautiful. That was good.
I was into research, so education is huge for me.
Yes.
Well, it's actually a good segue, because I think that a lot of student athletes don't know how to be activists. I mean, I think that when you look at the panelists here, especially, you're all very strong Black women that are a big part of this. And there is a kind of a disconnect at times with Black men in this space. So how do you become, how do you help people get to being activists? How do you help them unlock that inside of themselves? And Mikaela, we'll start with you first. Mikaela.
Thank you. So I think I can just talk about how I got there. So I wasn't always, I mean, I've always been a talker. I've always been strong-minded. I've always been the one to like stand up for people in a sense. And that was just part of my upbringing. Both my mother and father instilled in me, when something is wrong, speak out about it. You know, wrong is wrong, right is right. And that's what it is. Stick to that. And so I've always been that type, but I guess I was always a leader too, but I never really thought about organizing in the way that I did until like my sophomore year of college, and I got injured and I couldn't do anything. And so I was like, okay, I am struggling. I've never really been in this position. And I think the first step for me was when I was going through the struggle and I was like, I don't like how this feels. I don't like that I don't have many people supporting me or the support that I feel I need. And I'm pretty sure it should exist because they said on my visit that they would do this, that, and the third, but I don't see it. And so that was what pushed me to getting to becoming an activist, because I realized I didn't have what I needed and I can't be the only one. So how can I reach out to other folks, find out what they think, and then find those people at the top with the power and tell them, this is what's going on. How are you going to fix it? Because you told me X, Y, and Z, and you told all of us X, Y, and Z, and it's not happening. And you don't do something, and I'll go to somebody who will. Anyway, so that's how I became an activist. I started going through the struggle, but I think if you don't go through it, or if you are going through the struggle, but you feel like, well, that's just part of life. I think thinking back to like, okay, well, if someone came and told me they feel isolated, they're hurt right now, they're injured or whatever, they feel isolated, they need support. And you looked around and you were like, well, I don't know what to tell you. Then what? Are you just gonna like settle with that? And then so I think a lot of it is just putting yourself in that position, putting yourself in someone else's shoes, or realizing where you are and understanding that, okay, it shouldn't be like this. So how will we get to where it should be? For me, that was my first step to activism. Like, we're missing something. How can we get that piece in here? It's not gonna just come from me sitting here knowing we're missing it. I need to start talking. And that was my first step. So
Xochitl, what about yours?
So I come from a mixed household. I am Black on my mom's side, Mexican on my dad. So growing up, you know, Afro-Latina in Orange County, I felt a lot of confusion. I definitely had a lot of questions about what my identity looked like, you know, where I fit, you know, some people were like, oh, you're not enough of this, you're not enough of that, whatever. And so I definitely found myself being very confused in my identity for a very long time. So I turned to, you know, I read a lot of resources, I sought out culture, I sought out community. And, you know, there were holes in a lot of those places, a lot of those resources, there are definitely gaps. And the more that I learned, you know, the more injustice I saw, the more, and as I got older, I was like, this makes me very upset. Like, I'm angry. And I didn't know at first where to place those feelings. I didn't know, you know, how to talk about them. I wasn't really sure what could I, you know, realistically do about this besides saying, Mom, I'm mad. And so, you know, I went to college, or in high school, I went to, you know, not a very diverse high school. And so I was like, let me make BSU. Let me try to build a community where, you know, there isn't any. Let me try to, you know, bridge those gaps. And then I went to college and I was like, oh my God, this is so much bigger. You know, I am actually so small at UC Davis. There's no way that I can do anything here. But I found a group of people, you know, in, you know, the story of how CADSA came to be, I found a group of people who were like-minded and were also feeling these feelings, were also seeing this issue. And I was like, okay, the feeling, the emotion is there. The drive is there. You know, that passion and love for our community is there. We just needed that organizational piece. And so I think, you know, deep down, I was like, you know, burn the bra, like super activist, like I'm mad, like I want to do it. It was there. I just needed that like organizational push, you know, that sense of like, oh no, we have a group of people who are going to support you in pushing forward for change. Like, there are a group of people who are going to support all of your movements, who are going to support the meetings that you hold, who are going to support, you know, talking to administration, which is terrifying, like 100% still is terrifying. I'm not on mixed level yet. I'm not there yet. But I don't know.
Don't worry.
So maybe it'll get easier. But you know, it's scary, but there was this group of people who were supporting me. So I guess it kind of brought the activism that I felt inside, you know, on that outside level to where I could share it with other people who were possibly going through the same thing I was.
Dr. G, as former coach, former student athlete back in our day.
Oh yeah.
Kind of talk about your path to activism, but also what you've heard from these two women here on their path.
Yeah. So yes, as Chris said, you know, former ball player, point guard. Listen, my shot is still wet. Let me tell you that. Okay, I will need about a day or so to stretch to prepare. Okay, so if anyone wants a challenge, give me 2 days in advance, and I'll start to stretch. But anywho, you know, as I think about my own journey, just as Mikaela said, you know, I think I'm the middle child, only girl, right? So there was this kind of rough and tough tomboy piece of me that was just here from birth. And there were moments where I, you know, wanted to speak up about something. And it's just as Xochitl said, there's just this, you can be angry, right? There's this passion. You're not quite sure how to fuel it. In my younger days, I was a part of student government. I was the commissioner of athletics. So my main goal was to make sure that our female sports, women's sports, as well as the men's sports, they were promoted equally, right? We were highlighting both sports, but you know, both athletes and things like that, because there was a balance. At the time, our football team was kicking butt, but so was our women's basketball team. So let's, you know, as I reflect back on my younger days, there was this activist in me. But just like, as you know, Sochi and Mikaela said, sometimes you're not quite sure where to fuel it. And so as I began my PhD program back in 2015, you know, as we know what was going on in the world, and as a Black woman, I did not want to squander that. And I said, how can I give back? What can I contribute, right? What can I continue to learn, so that wherever I'm placed, whether if it's, you know, staying in student affairs or faculty, what can I continue to give back? And just as these ladies were saying, they saw their campus and there was a need. And as, like I said, a Black student at a predominantly white university that I was at, I created the Black Doctoral Student Association. So I knew that there was something very unique about being a Black scholar at a predominantly white institution in Southern California. So, you know, you may think, what can I do? But there's always something that you can do. You find your village, right? And like I said, I'm so happy and proud, you know, of my dissertation, where I built something for those, for those stakeholders that say they want to support, you know, our athletes and more than their athletic identity. But I always wanted to create something for those that are looking to find their voice. And I think that this past year and a half was something that was very near and dear to me. You know, when Mikaela said that she wasn't able to engage in her sport, we found out we were pregnant March 10th, the world shut down on March 13th. Oh, okay. So this is happening. And so I could not engage in one of my vehicles of choice when it comes to activism, which is marching and protesting, pregnant, but also pandemic and things of that nature. And I felt helpless too. The world was burning down around us, right? It was beautiful to see that there was protesting in every single state, right, in the United States, as well as, you know, some countries. That was beautiful, that was historic. But I said, what can I do? How can I help? How can I support my students? And as we know, there was a lot of performative activism. There was that Black Square. Y'all remember that? There was that Black Square. But there were also folks that I know were reaching out to all of us, asking how can they do better, right? There was this heightened consciousness, and I think it was due to that coronavirus and quarantine. We were all at home. And some of our escape is social media. Well, we saw, unfortunately, lives being lost, right? And we were unfortunately privy to that because of our cell phone. So there were folks that had the privilege of looking away or not engaging, but there was something different about, you know, last summer and this past year. And so I created the activism growth model for hopefully a lighthouse, a resource, a guide for those that have been engaging in activism, but maybe things have changed and they want to figure out where their place is, because there's a place for everyone, y'all. Faculty, staff, student, members of the community, your mama, your granny, right? Your abuela, there's a place. And so that was kind of my labor of love. And I continue to grow in my activism. And so the activism growth model was built from wonderful voices, right, of student athletes, community activists, students of color who are activists as well. And hopefully these are things that can serve as a resource for those that are looking to lean in. So I'm really proud to just be here. And this is my form of, activism, but giving something back. And I just hope that it continues and that I can always be a resource, and a lighthouse for those wanting to continue to grow in their activism.
Mikaela and Xochitl, let's go back to your organization real quick. And Dr. G had mentioned, of course, the world burning for a very long time and a lot of difficult things. Yeah. And one probably the more difficult things to do right now is to keep the momentum going. So how do you keep the momentum going? And Xochitl, you can go first with this one.
Yeah, so it definitely, the past year, I think, even with all of the social and health issues that were going on, I think a humongous part of it, or a huge difficulty that we faced was Zoom fatigue and transitioning everything online. We were a really new organization. We were building momentum on campus, in person. We had all these projects and events lined up. We had keynote speakers. We had things we were excited to do, and then the world shut down. And transitioning all of those things online was so incredibly difficult. And especially, all of us were going through everything. And so, people didn't want to go to events. People didn't want to hang out. People didn't, want to listen to a talk. And so that definitely was extremely difficult. But I think we did a really great job. Like, I'm really proud of the work that CADSA put in. I can speak for CADSA UC Davis specifically. We launched a whole bunch of new food insecurity initiatives. That's one of the, it's a huge topic that we deal with at UC Davis, athletes going hungry during season, out of season, just in general. There's basic needs and security for student athletes, and it's definitely something that's not talked about, but it happens like everywhere. And so, during the pandemic, we really worked hard. We were sitting in those Zoom meetings even when we didn't want to. We had all those Google Docs, and we actually put forward we worked with CalFresh. Now it's easier for student athletes at UC Davis to get CalFresh, have access to those resources. But I think we put in all of that work online when not that we didn't want to, but when it was really difficult. And I think everyone's really excited to not be online. I think it's going to be a lot easier to get people to come to our events. I think people are excited to, support us, and people are excited to be with our community that we built, and, kind of reap the benefits of the really hard year that we just came out of. And I think people are really excited. I know I'm really excited. I know all of our board is just so pumped to finally see each other and, finally just put forward the events and the projects that we've been working on for so long and actually, see them flourish.
Yeah, I think Sochi really hit the nail on the head. When it comes to CADSA UC Davis, they did some amazing stuff over the pandemic. And I will say, while it was hard because, you're stuck at home in front of a computer screen, So you have time to do those things that you wouldn't have had time doing because you're outside doing something. So I think we utilize that a lot to do a lot of behind the scenes work with CADSA National, getting together what the numbers are within the NCAA and other conferences when it comes to Black student athlete organizations, also putting together who are the resources we want to reach out to and partner with and connect with and have events with once that time comes. And then also being able to expand nationally was a lot easier because of the pandemic. Everyone's online. So it's really easy to say, hey, you want to come to our meeting to learn more about us? All you gotta do is come to the Zoom link. You don't need to fly to California and find out, or we don't have to find a central location to do that. So I think for CADSA National, really it was a big time for building on the back end, but also getting the word out and connecting with folks across the country. Now moving forward, now that we're opening up more, I think it's super exciting to be able to be in person, really excited to partner with some other organizations in person, hopefully to get into that Black Student-Athlete organization and get to see faces and actually speak about what we're doing and connect with people one-on-one. But I'll say pandemic kind of worked in our favor on the national side, especially for myself. I spent a lot of that time figuring out, okay, what is a nonprofit and how do we do this? So that was super helpful, but I will say it's exciting to get out of that. And I will also say it still makes it easier moving forward to connect on a national level, because we know we can do it virtually. It's not like reading a new textbook and you're trying to figure out how to speak the language. Like, we know, everyone knows it's possible. Now, will they want to? We'll see, hopefully. But, you know, I think we'll utilize what went on with the pandemic and find the strengths in it, and then morph that with being more in person.
Well, I think that just from an outside observer, I think your adaptability during all this time is just, from what I'm hearing from both of you, is tremendous. And Dr. G, you talked about it a little bit before. And now with your role with CATSA, how do you keep the momentum also going forward?
You know, I think a lot of folks learned how to survive online, right? And just as like Mikaela said, okay, now they know that it's possible. I'm able to hop on a Zoom. If there's any board meetings, I'm able to, hey, Mikaela, can you hop on a Zoom, right, to speak with students? So I think that as we go back to normal, whatever that is, I think that in many ways, there will always be some sort of either virtual or online component. CASA, they've got different series of their podcast, right? And just different ways to connect globally to folks. And so as a board member, as hopefully a mentor and resource, anytime that I, come across new resources, new information, new ideas, even folks that can, serve as partners or connect or serve as mentors with CASA, that's I'm always thinking about that. I'm like, oh, that's good. Now that I have met Xochitl, okay, let me, send them information. So really happy to serve in any sort of resource, any way possible, putting, the whole team in spaces where they can share about it. Like I said, in my class, I will always have a portion of advocacy and activism, particularly athlete activism. So I'm always going to invite, the CASA team to, if it's going to be a Zoom, because, we're all over, right? So there's always a space for me to assist in the exposure of CASA, because like I said, there needs to be a chapter, there needs to be a safe space for not just, for all athletes, right? Because this is a different identity than maybe general students may have, but there's a very unique experience about being a Black athlete, about being an athlete of color. And I think that the way that CASDA is expanding, offering that, literally they provide steps to create, right? Here, these are the stakeholders that you need to reach out to, because I know that there are students, I know that there's faculty and staff that want to support, but to have a guide and to have folks that are literally building and have built a wonderful grassroots organization to help folks create these safe spaces, I'm all for it. So it's really support and any way that I can, rep CASDA in any way possible, because I think that this is so imperative of what's happening. And I think that every university needs to have a CASDA chapter, and most importantly, needs to have a safe space. So that's how I will continue to support and be a part. Any other way, text me, call me, whatever y'all need. But that's what I'm thinking of how I can hopefully be an immediate resource.
Well, I'm going to put up some resources here for our attendees to check out. But before we get to this, kind of our grand finale, right? We talked, how can we make this personal for everyone? So this is something that I'll ask each one of you about, is what is the takeaway from today? How can our attendees make this personal? And I'll start first with Sochi, and then we'll go to Mikaela, and we'll end with Dr. G. So Sochi, go ahead.
Okay. I think, to the person who's wondering how to get in there, I guess a takeaway is that no one is too small. No one is too small to be an activist. No one is too small to get involved, make a change. Nothing is too crazy. I mean, look at where we are now. We're holding this webinar, and people are going to see it, and everyone's everywhere. And so I think there are communities for you. There are people who are always going to support the cause that you're interested in. And so I just think that for anyone, the takeaway is, you are never too small. you can always enact some type of change that can be a domino effect, to large change. Or you can be like Kadza and help you form a group of people who love and care about you, and trying to push those resources, trying to build that community. So don't ever limit yourself because you think you as one person can't do it, because there will always be a community that you will find that will back you.
So thanks, Sochi. I'll say takeaway for me is that don't allow who you are in the world and who you think you are in the world and whatever position you hold to stop you from supporting the things you're passionate about. I hold a lot of different identities and I'm involved with all different things, but I never allow myself to veer away from who I truly am and what I'm passionate about. So as a Black, queer, former student athlete, all these different things, first generation, all of those things, I won't let that go away just because I hold some type of title or I'm in a certain space, and that's everywhere I go. So I think if you truly understand who you are and what you're passionate about, and you're like, well, how can I be an activist when it comes to these things? Just don't ever let go of it. And that will guide you. When you feel uncomfortable, you'll speak up. When you feel like, oh, I can be doing more, you will create that more. But you just have to stay true to what you're passionate about. And I think if you're struggling with understanding what that means, and you're a Black student athlete or an ally to the Black student athlete community, obviously reach out to us. Any of us would help. I don't know if you can hear me.
No, you're good.
Oh, okay, I'm still here. Cool. I thought my earphones died. It went, sorry, let me hurry up before it does die. But if you do, or if you're on that cusp and you're trying to figure out, how do I do this? Where do I start? You need people to talk to. Obviously our website is there, but you also can just email info@kadzanational.org and any of us will get back to you. But truly just stay true to yourself and what you're passionate about, and don't let whatever title you hold veer you away from supporting that wholeheartedly. That will truly make you an activist.
I would say we need you. And, I know that there's diversity in who's watching this webinar, but we need you. And as Mikaela talked about title, right? So whether whatever title you may hold, we all have some sort of privilege, right? And I like the word ecosystem. We all are affected by some sort of ecosystem, and we can affect that ecosystem. And now is the time to not be lukewarm. Just like as these wonderful women have said throughout our time together, if you see something that, do that soul work. If it's something that is not right, and you have the privilege and the position to speak up or create something, or, invite guest speakers in, or, whatever the case is, we need you. We need your voice. We need your passion to this movement. And the movement is literally just equity, right? And diversity and inclusivity for all. And it does, you can be the 11th player, on the team, or you can be a starter. You can be the athletic director. You can be the president or provost. That does not matter. We need you. And continue to just find your village, and know that a wonderful organization as Kadza is here, which is great for those faculty and staff. I'm always a resource. There's always a resource, because if you are passionate about making a difference, we, right, definitely don't want what's stopping you is I don't even know where to begin, right? So that's it. Like we don't want you to be you've been thinking about, should I get involved? What should I do? The answer is yes, and we need you.
Well, thank you so much. Dr. G, why don't you go through our resources here to kind of wrap us up, and then we'll put it out in the world.
Sure. Well, this has been fun. So resources, we've got a couple of slides. Obviously, I think, please check out kadzanational.org. The resources continue to build. I said resources tab, but literally have fun, peruse through the whole website, learn more about the story, more about the origin of this wonderful organization, where they're going, who is a part of the team, right? And how can you get involved in the resources? But just even creating a chapter, like I said, I'm really excited to see what the fall holds, because we're hoping to create a chapter on my campus. So, Kadzanational.org, right? like I said, throughout my time together, I'm so appreciative of my labors of love that I've been able to create and really reflect back on my time as a former athlete, as a coach, now as a practitioner and professor. I've written a book, and I hope that the title is Love is at the Root of the Resistance, Strategies of Activism, Advocacy, and Liberation. I break down the activism growth model. I provide spaces for folks to reflect, right? It's like a handbook. It's a living, breathing thing because we need you. And if you're wondering where you fit in this movement, I'm hoping that this is a place for you. This book is a place for you, available on Amazon and all those good things. And also please reach out to me. I'm happy to serve as a resource. The second is my actual dissertation. As we talk about, critical race theory is something that is a hotbed of conversation right now. Listen, you don't have to read a whole dissertation. Don't do that. I mean, I love it, but don't do that. Chapter 2 breaks down CRT. Like I said, it's also my dissertation specifically centering the narratives of Black college athlete activists. So that's one page of resources. And then the next one is we continue to talk specifically about grassroots activism and advocacy and organization. That's why we're here. As we talk about social media, the Digital Citizen is a great resource. Like I said, you can probably either take a screenshot, right? Ladies pose, hey, take a screenshot of these titles and it's available on Google. It really talks about how, digital media, right? Social media, there's a space and place for that as well. As we talk about, this past election, y'all, social media was something very, very pivotal, right? To not only educate us, right? That, hey, yes, we should be voting, on the national level for, and for our president, but guess what? We need to be aware of different local leaders and things like that. So that the Digital Citizen is a wonderful resource just to learn more about how social media can be used for the good. It's all about the base, a guide to building a grassroots organization or a program. This really breaks down, how to work with the community. And your community is what you make of it, right? It could be on your campus or your local community. So that's a really great guide. It's a PDF. Like I said, it's free. And then lastly, what's really cool about Stir It Up Lessons in Community Organization and Advocacy, this built from a group of women who created different grassroots organization, and they share about the lessons that they've learned, what worked, what didn't work. So hopefully that those that are interested in building something that can take the baton and grow and build. So those are just a few resources. I forgot to put my website, drgyasmine.com. I'm also building a resource tab so that people can continue to, just like Mikaela said, yes, we can always share, but the needle is moved when you continue to educate yourselves and how you can be a resource. So that's just a quick snapshot of some of the resources that we're hoping that y'all can glean from and take this movement on up.
All right, thank you so much for joining. I think that I learned a lot from the three of you, and I hope that our attendees did as well. And of course, we'll put out snippets of our conversation today across our social medias. We'll put all our resources as well. And of course, you can find CATSA's website, catsanational.org, to learn more about them. And of course, Dr. G's website, which was again?
drgyasmine.com. Y'all saw how fun my first name is spelled. Shout out to mom and dad. But it's drgyasmine.com.
Thank you so much. And, hopefully we can continue the conversation. We can continue the movement forward. What all of you are doing is pivotal to this. And, I'm so happy to have been able to speak to you all today and to be a part of this. So with that, this has been Undivided Dialogues. Thank you very much for joining us, and everyone have a great day.
Thank you.
Bye, everybody.